Hi, everybody. This is really a pleasure and an honor to be presenting this program today. As Christelle said, it'll be 30 years in December since I joined PSSA, and everything made a lot of difference in my life in terms of Sumi, in terms of mutual support in this art form, in terms of learning new things and being part of this wonderful community. This talk is about how I got to Sumi before PSSA. So it feels to me now kind of like a fairy tale. It's probably my age also. When you go back to the past and put together these pieces, it feels like there were breadcrumbs that I picked up from a very early age, and I didn't know where they were leading me. But now at this age, I see a pattern, which is kind of nice. There's also some rabbit holes. Yeah, so we'll visit, I think, a couple of them. And hopefully we won't stay in the rabbit holes too long. And you might find them interesting anyway. But it doesn't matter. It'll just be a kind of a fun thing to do. But the most important thing is to have enough time at the end to pick up the brush, get our ink out and paper, and actually do Sumi, because that's where the magic is. This is kind of one person's way of getting there, getting here. So I have to thank Christelle for her creativity and her wonderful ideas, and for actually getting all this to the screen. I'm totally grateful and just blown away by what she can do. And so if other members would like to share their story in this way, check out Christelle, because she will make it happen in a wonderful way. Anyway, we're luckily she's right here. So if anything happens, she'll fix it. So we're starting out with an image of a painting I did in the 1980s. And we'll talk more, I'll talk more later about that group of work. So you'll hear more about it later. The story, as I said, about getting into Sumi art feels like a fairy tale. And I think we can just go to the next one.
Okay.
And it started here in the Pacific Northwest. And the first breadcrumbs were things that were in the air in the 1960s. I'm a child of the 60s. And so here's a haiku book that I've had since then. And so haiku was in the air. And then this Japanese ink painting book by Ryuku Saito was the first book I ever bought myself as a teenager at a book fair. And I just loved the look of it, and I've kept it all these years. And on page, let's see, I wrote down the page. I hope I wrote down the page. But anyway, if you look through this book and you happen to have it, it's been reprinted. I think it's still being reprinted. There's my Spark Sumi painting is in this book. And if you're a bird watcher, you know, you might connect spark bird. So I'm connecting Spark Sumi with spark bird. And a spark bird is the first bird you see that makes you a bird watcher for life. And my spark bird is a common redpoll, which I saw in upstate New York many years after high school. Well, the spark painting in this book is of a camellia. And we can't really show you the picture, but if you have the book, you can look in it. And it's interesting with spark birds and spark paintings, don't even need to look at the book. They're just inside you. I think we can go on to the next one. And then in high school, we got to, because I was in this part of the country, got to go to Seattle on field trips. I just love them because we would go to the Seattle Art Museum and look at, and my favorite, of course, was Asian art. And this is a book I found that was actually published in 1960. And it shows the famous deer scroll, which is in the Seattle Art Museum, which was, you can see the Sumi work on this very famous painting. And then the fun part was going out for a traditional Japanese dinner at the Seattle restaurant called Busch Gardens. And it was tatami and the whole thing. And I just, that was one of the most favorite things I did in high school. I think we had the traditional sukiyaki dinner, not sukiyaki, but sukiyaki dinner at that restaurant. Okay. So I got into Chinese studies and studying Chinese language, Mandarin, in college. And I just, the sort of breadcrumb there was my college just happened to start offering Chinese as a foreign language my freshman year. And I had 4 different professors while I was in college. But the really amazing thing was a trip to Taiwan in 1968. You could tell by the map there that it was, the map kind of dates that time. It looks so old-fashioned. Taiwan, it's so different now than it was in 1968. So this was, for me, a life-changing event. It was travel to Taiwan, where I lived with a family in Taipei, and I traveled with the Experiment in International Living. So the idea was we lived with families and learned about their way of life. We did some traveling, and going to and from Taiwan, I was able to take a short trip to Hong Kong, and we stayed in Kyoto and Tokyo, going and coming. It was a really amazing experience. The picture of somebody in pink is a funny picture that my family took before I left. They wanted me to wear a traditional qibao dress and take pictures of well, they took this picture of me, but I have pictures of the family I was with, and it was really quite an event. It was really wonderful. But this would be sort of like just before I left. And the chop is spring, which I had, I bought there and have kept all these years. And then we have a picture on the side of the National Palace Museum in Taipei, where they have all this wonderful Asian art, Chinese art. And that was also a wonderful experience, although I wish I could teleport myself back to Taipei and visit that museum again at this age, because I know so much more than I did at that time. Okay. Now we're about to enter a rabbit hole, and this was graduate school. So by the time I graduated, there was federal money available to study what they called critical languages, and that is Chinese, Arabic, and I think the third one was Russian, because the government felt like more Americans should know these languages. So I received a 5-year fellowship to go on to graduate school in the study of Chinese literature. This is a rabbit hole of the big kind. It's unbelievable when I look back now on what was involved. So this is obviously a topic for a whole nother program. And so we're going to show you some visuals that I hope give sort of an indication of some of the work, but not so much that, but what I found useful later on when I actually joined PSSA and began to learn how to use the brush for calligraphy. So I wrote about 2 poets and their language, and Xie Lingyun and Xie Tiao, and we're in 5th century. This is 5th century China, and Xie Lingyun was particularly known to be kind of like the father of Chinese mountains and rivers poetry, so nature poetry. He's a really an interesting character who actually climbed mountains physically. He wasn't a scholar who just sat at his desk and looked at a beautiful rock and imagined the mountains. He was actually climbing them. But we can't really get into his story right now. But the major part for me is part of the dissertation is hinted at by the page to your right, which is a page from my dissertation that's basically just a huge long list of Chinese, which appeared in his 5-word line poems, and these are couplets in which each word that appeared in those poems was listed. It's a concordance. The English word for it is a concordance. This was back in the time when there weren't computers to translate Chinese into a form that could be typed out or printed, or none of the computer stuff was here. So I did this all by hand, but all Chinese students did, because you had to, if you were writing about literature or wanted to write about a poem and you wanted the Chinese in your writing, well, you had to write it all out by hand. And so over time, you kind of I learned how Chinese characters were put together, basically. And this was over 200 pages of this, and it took years. This is a major rabbit hole. And for a long time, I thought it was the crazy period of my life, until I joined PSSA and started doing brush calligraphy and realized I didn't know how to use the brush, but I know how characters are put together because of this. So our next slide this was Christelle's idea, is a window into Xie couplets, because you see all these lists of characters, but he was expressing a whole world this way. And so just by looking at a couple couplets, you can hopefully get a sense, a little taste, a little breadcrumb that suggests the kind of poems he was writing. So this is from the listing of under the character that he used for wind. So wind is the second on the first line, the fourth character. So the concordance has wind, and then underneath wind is all the lines in which he used wind. And the English is autumn winds gently subside, green and lush, spring grass grows in profusion. So he'd have all of these poems, and a couplet like that would just jump out as being very alive and distinctive. So we have another one to show you. And this is his most famous couplet. The pond is alive with spring grass. Garden willows have turned into singing birds. And the amazing birds in that couplet are both 1, 2, 3. The third one on the first line and the third one on the second line. And the first line, it's growth, it's alive, it's growing. And the second one is change. Everything is growing and changing. And somehow in just this couplet, he just coalesced that whole feeling of growth and change. And for that reason, it's stayed in people's memories. They don't have to think of it. It's just in their memories because it was so vivid. And we have one more to show you. This is a one line. White clouds embrace the dim rocks. And this one has been used not only in China as part of the sort of lines that have stayed in people's minds, but also in Japan. And an example can be seen in this book we've on the book list shown on the right side of the screen, A Zen Forest. This is a Japanese book, or translation of a Japanese book of sayings by Zen masters. And lo and behold, this line is in it, which I thought was amazing, that going through all those centuries and then ending up in Japan. It's like, okay, this is part of a big picture. So that in a nutshell is some of the nature of this rabbit hole I was in for a long time. It took me forever to finish this work, but it got done. Okay.
Could I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Before you move on, it's Kathy.
Uh-oh, we lost her voice. We lost her voice.
Yeah. You're muted, Kathy.
Oh, somebody muted me again. Could you explain a little bit more the concept of concordance that you referenced? Because I didn't quite get that.
So concordance is like a dictionary. So any character, in the Chinese sense, any character that appeared in Selingun's 5-word line poems, it's like a dictionary in a way. So it's arranged, so you arrange each character, and then underneath that character, you list all the occasions in which it was used. And so the dissertation was kind of had a linguistic sort of thing going on, which is called a frequency list. And so if you have a concordance for someone's work, you can figure out which words they use more than other words. And it's most commonly used, and maybe in Western culture, because there's a lot of concordances, for example, to the Bible. People want to know how many words, how many times a particular word appears in the Bible. So concordances will sometimes be attached to the Bible at the back of the book or something like that. So it's primarily a kind of dictionary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like looking for frequency, basically, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's right. All right.
This is absolutely incredible what you did. One last question is,
Oh, we cannot hear you.
but I keep getting muted. Were the
Mhm.
originals of the poems written vertically from right to left?
Yes. Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
the Chinese would have written from top to bottom, right to left. For writing in English about a Chinese subject and using the Chinese text, it's just more convenient for publication and printing purposes to write everything horizontally.
Right,
That's why that looks, that kind of thing.
right.
So
Thank
we can
you.
answer. Oh, sure. Yeah. Anyway, as I said, when especially later now, I wrote these out first on graph paper to get the characters all lined up. And then when it's all done, you kind of copy it and it comes out on plain paper. And so later in life, when I started practicing calligraphy, shodo, on the calligraphy practice paper, then I really got it. I said, okay, I think I know how these strokes go together because they're in a square. And we'll maybe talk more about squares later. Okay, so the next breadcrumbs were found in Sacramento, where I lived for 9 months and got to take a graduate course in Chinese art at UC Davis, and took my first actual painting class with a Chinese teacher there. And he was amazed that I was so terrible after having studied Chinese so long. He was like, he couldn't quite put 2 and 2 together, but that was my first introduction. And I want to introduce, if you don't know it, this book that's pictured on the left, which is a wonderful book which doesn't talk to you about how to do painting, but instead shows examples of Chinese painting with gorgeous reproductions and also gorgeous details of each painting. And you can actually see how the brush strokes work by looking at this book, which is really inexpensive, published by Dover, and kind of part of, I think, the traditional way of learning how to paint in China, where you look at the originals a lot. Okay, so we were going to move on. And so after Sacramento, breadcrumbs in Texas. And this is, I should say that I finished my dissertation in Texas before the Sacramento trip. So this is back to Texas. And when I started painting, I think I brought a lot of some supplies with me from Sacramento and probably Washington. So this picture of the assorted Japanese paper for sumi painting, that's a Yasutomo paper. But at that time, they had 3 types of paper in the the paper pad. So you could already experiment with different papers, Kozo and Hosho, and which was the other one? I have it written here, Gazen. So right at the very beginning, one could experiment with different papers because the paper was available this way, and these papers were readily available in art supply stores, at least at that time. And the seal shows the Chinese name I received from one of my neighbors, one of my teachers in college. And one of my good friends had it carved for me when she visited China. And maybe you've had this experience where someone gives you a seal and you say, well, now I've got to use it on something. I guess I should maybe do some painting and then I can use the seal. And so this was the first one I had with my name. And so as we move along, you'll see it prominently in some of the early work. Okay, so what did I do? What did I paint and what was inspiring? Well, this is one of the things that really inspired me was the Chinese Book of Changes, primarily because, and it was reflected a little bit in Xie couplet, but primarily because in my personal life and in moving around, moving and change was the big challenge in my life. And I found this ancient classic, Chinese classic, to be really practically helpful and very interesting in ideas for visual art. And the illustrated I Ching on the left is a surprisingly useful book, especially for me, because it combines the Chinese text with English to that, and then on the corresponding page for each hexagram is an illustration of a piece of art, Chinese art. So right there you have the reflection in visual terms of what's being talked about in philosophical terms. The two go together. I'm going to look at my notes a little bit because sometimes it's hard to digest what the Book of Changes is. It would be the topic for another program, but I just tried to give a sense of it, is that the I Ching consists of 84 graphic symbols called hexagrams, and they reflect the aspects of change and movement which characterize our lives, our personal lives, and cosmic reality. And so we know from physics and science and all these things going on that everything is in motion, everything is changing, and there's sort of practical issues in terms of living a human life and how to adjust, how to make decisions, and the wisdom that's accumulated through this classic is helpful to people. And so sometimes it's helpful in a very philosophical kind of way. Sometimes it's very practical. But the thing that really inspired me is that each one of these graphic symbols has a description of what it is in the terms of landscape. So you actually have like a short, almost, it's not really a poem, but it's a short line, which talks about the relationships between heaven and mountains and heaven and water, or earth and rain, thunder, rivers, lakes, all these things, all that sort of seems like kind of unapproachable aspects of reality are condensed into a landscape image. And this is what inspired me to start painting. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. If you have more questions, the book on the right is maybe some of you recognize it because they've kept the same gray cover with the yellow. This is the classic translation, and it's just been continuously in print since it was published by the Princeton University Press. And so this would be another sort of kind of, there's a lot in it. So it's a lot to keep you busy if you're interested. Okay, so now we'll just see how this inspired me to start doing Sumi. And of course, I was in Texas. There weren't teachers there, so I kind of based on kind of art I'd seen, but you know, looking at wondering how to use the brush that I now had and the ink and the paper, I was kind of creating this on my own, but I was also inspired by the landscape in West Texas, which is really different from Pacific Northwest or upstate New York. It's like, okay, this is different, culturally different, the landscape's different, but lo and behold, a dry brush sort of kind of captures it. And so then I could use characters from my past, but in a simplified form, the words that describe this hexagram, which is number 11. In English, it's peace. And the characters you can see up there on the left, heaven and earth unite. And so that's even now sends chills up and down my spine. It says, what is that? How can that be expressed? You know, can we do it in Sumi? Yes, we can. I don't know how to do it, but we'll figure it out. And so I spend quite a number. This is really the beginning of my Sumi art. I have kept these paintings. I don't know the total count of them now, but for many years and hadn't really gotten them out. They were just sitting in their little box waiting. This one, when I looked at it, I said, whoa, how did I get there? Because it looks so sumie. It's got the tones, it's got white and gray tones, and it's got some dark. And look at that, it's got some writing going on down here. There's some Chinese and all of that. And it's sort of like, how did this happen? I think it's just a accumulation of all the breadcrumbs over the years. It just kind of coalesced in this environment and just a real interest in getting in touch with my own sort of creative self. I mean, I realized then I was less of an academic than an artist, and then having this sort of way to get into it, I was like, whoa. I mean, it's still, I look at it, I say, how did this happen? But anyway, there it is. This is below the mountain, the lake. So the point is kind of like there are these short little descriptions, but it takes the artist in me to figure out how to express it in visual terms, and yet come to terms with what Sumi ink can do. Luckily, this happens to be a semi-sized paper. Feeling the paper, oh, this is semi-sized. That's why it's got these nice watery sort of look with it. And kind of like, I really like the way these clouds are happening. I'm like, how do they? Well, anyway, I think it's pretty exciting that a beginner could after beginning, kind of have this. And I'm happy I kept it. I really am. So I have a few more here. So we're watching the time. Actually, we're doing really well on time because I want to spend much more time on actually getting out the brush and ink and sort of experimenting with some of these things right here shortly. Okay, so this was another one. Mountain under heaven, retreat. So these hexagrams, they're sort of like, sometimes they encourage you to move forward. Sometimes they say you better, back off because the situation isn't good. And this one I like showing because this is really a beginner trying to figure out, well, how would you put, under the heaven, there's a mountain. Well, this is pretty basic and sort of like making it one stroke that can suggest a mountain. What really interests me is that very large kind of like circle shape for heaven. It's like, that's kind of interesting. And it's so kind of big relative to the mountain. Of course, it would be big, but so I sit and look at that. I think, well, this is it's interesting in terms of showing how a beginner might tackle something like this and how she did. And I might have another version of it among those papers that expresses it differently.
Selinda,
Yeah.
Look at the bird in that illustration.
Mm-hmm.
You have expressed your bird as watching as well. See, in the dark part, there's the beak and the bird is curled.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. You know, people have said this to me before that I had not with this particular one, but with some of the others. Oh, look at the bird. Oh,
Yeah,
yes, the
yeah,
spark bird.
look at the bird.
Thank you for noticing that. Yes, so this is the other thing, and the other reason why we're going to be doing some more with Ensō, because there's so many possibilities in the circle. And it turns out, like a beginner painter will do circles. You know, little children do circles. We put the sun in the sky or the moon in the sky. They're just there. They just come up. In the context of graphic symbols, circles, in going way, way back. This is way, 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 way back. With a lot of cultures, the circle will symbolize heaven, and a square will symbolize earth. And so later on, we'll see some of how they come in that way. I don't know. I think it was in that sort of intuitive thing that's, you kind of know about these things internally, but you don't really know. They just happen. So thank you. I'm so excited that you saw the bird. Oh, great. Okay, so we'll move on a little bit. And this one is wind moving over water. I didn't put the water in it. Or maybe maybe it is the ripples of the wind over the water. It's just kind of like a free-flowing thing like that. I had, for some reason, decided I needed to have a sun or moon in the picture as well. And the meaning is dispersing or scattering. So things, instead of being coalesced, are dispersing, scattering the way they do when the wind blows over water. This one shows, I like the other contrast, which is that Sumi ink is so great. When you have intense black, then the white shows up in a different sort of way. And to me, this really illustrates an illustration of this hexagram, which is number 36. Light enters the middle of Earth. So the square shape I'm thinking is Earth. Light enters that, light's darkening. So the white, the circle, semi sort of circle or sort of Ensō circle, the white is much smaller than it might be otherwise if it wasn't darkening. So in the I Ching, these symbols, they're the whole gamut of change in terms of what happens in our lives and what's happening in the universe. It's pretty big. It's a big story. Okay. This is thunder in the middle of Earth, return. I have done many versions of this one, including one on behind us on the wall over the years, because how to express thunder in visual terms is an interesting challenge. And so I've tried different things. The Earth square is reflected in this painting by the paper. The paper's cut in a square. And the thunder sort of is suggestive, kind of like, I think I'm thinking of sound waves. I don't know if sound waves go out this way, but at that time I thought, well, maybe it's like this. And it's in the earth, so anyway, but it's interesting how there's like still kind of a sense of an Ensō as part of it. And dry brush up at the top, sort of like Texas terrain, suggesting earth in terms of texture. I'm very still excited about how Sumi ink expresses texture. And I was at the very beginning in Texas because of the nature of the ground there. Okay, I guess we can go. This one astonished me when I rediscovered this one. Notice, maybe you can notice, my writing's getting better. My Chinese writing's getting better. When I started this, there was like carefully printing out the characters and trying to use the brush to do it. And so I was very careful in trying to get all the strokes right. But this one is starting to capture the feeling of the dry feeling of the meaning of this hexagram, which is number 47, which is exhaustion. And somehow, I don't know how this happened, it came out at that dried up feeling in the ground and in the sun above. And the words, the image is, there is no water in the lake. I just can't believe that this one happened. This would be the kind of painting that happens without one's knowing how it happens. And just realizing later, whoa, that says something. I like showing these because this is, you know, beginning and just using the simple tools that we have in Sumi art and just seeing what happens. So we have a few more. This one is heaven and water moving apart, conflict. That's number 6. And this time I was actually visualizing the image as a landscape with a waterfall falling down and the sun or moon circle rising, but going in an opposite direction. And then one more from, or maybe 2 more from the I Ching. This is thunder comes resounding out of earth. Enthusiasm. So there again, I'm kind of thinking, looking out the window, I mean, not thinking, imagining the terrain in West Texas and coming out of the earth. And in there, you know, it's a big sky kind of place. So the relationship between the sun and the earth is very dramatic. And then I'm trying to imagine thunder again. It's kind of like maybe sound, but taking this sort of semicircular shape. You can see my big seal on each one of them because it's a fairly large seal. It's quite prominent in these paintings. Okay, and then one more this to give you an example from the I Ching. This is number 6. No, this is number 6. No, this is number 46, which is ascend or pushing up. Within the earth, wood grows. And so this is an example of placing the whole image inside a square, that's the earth. And then imagining the tree coming out of the earth in a kind of image. And I also discovered at this time as a beginner that it was really helpful to paint images inside a square or a circle because I didn't have to worry about composition. They just looked pretty cool inside the square and the circle. And I try to encourage my students to practice Ensōs, and then if they want, put images inside the circle or square for that reason. Okay. So to move on a little bit, at this time, still in West Texas, I sent a painting to my dad in Tacoma. This is the first one I ever framed. Just to send him he never wanted to visit Texas, but I thought he needed to see what my vision of what it was, what it's like. And I didn't know how to mount any of these, so they were framed just as they were. Later, people told me that sometime when I saw the mounted ones, you know, I kind of liked it on the wrinkly paper. You know, they kind of like that effect. So, which is interesting. I had so many paintings done during this time that I put on a solo show. This is just craziness of craziness. But one of the breadcrumbs, Sumi breadcrumbs, was a time I was in Lubbock, Texas, finishing my dissertation. They had a museum studies program there. And one of the classes I took was exhibit prep and design. So we had to learn how to put together exhibits and make labels and make this plaque, you know, things that went up on the wall to explain what it was about, and said, so I just did it all. I just was full of it. I mean, it's just full of the sense of art, and I want people to see it, and I just did it. It was crazy. And so I did that. I rented a space for a month. All you have to do is pay the rent to the landlord and get some liability insurance, and then let people know that it's happening. And it happened. Later, well, yeah, because we did want to show this. So I was writing poems, my own poems, as also at this time. So then I got a sense of what haiga was, although I didn't know what haiga was. I just was doing it. And I was hiding the poems, especially my poems, in boxes. I called them poetry boxes. And so this image on the right is an actual box I made from, the design was a box that contained incense, and it was just the right size. So I opened up the incense box and made a template, and then made lots of these using manila file folders, and then folding it back so it was like, all together the way the incense box was. And then I may do these Sumi things with my poems, with some little things like this is a piece of caliche, which is the kind of rock that's down in West Texas. It's kind of like a limestone kind of carbonate kind of a rock, and then put them in the box. And they were part of the art show, and many people bought them. And I still have quite a number of them. So this art show was not just paintings on the wall, but it was also the 3D experience happening. I think you can read this poem probably for where you're sitting, but it does feature a cactus wren biting for food, wedged in cracks, scolding. They have a very sharp voice, these cactus wrens. And there's the Sumi rock like shapes down below. So we're looking at the time because we want to get some ink out now. So we'll move on to, this is a West Texas, this is a West Texas painting of a mesquite, Sumi mesquite. Luckily, inside the circle and the square. But a lot of dry brush. I use dry brush a lot down there. And this is my early version of a haiga, although I can tell you I didn't know what haiga was, but there it is. I think it's kind of amazing when I look at it. The poem is, when my mind gets her own eyes back, they fill with tears. And somehow the magic of Sumi above those dry strokes at the bottom gives this watery effect that, brings tears to my eyes. And to me, that's the essence of a haiga, or the interrelationship of poetry and the image in that art form. So yeah. Thank you. So we'll just move on as a sort of like a little segue here, because we do want to have a little chance to sort of take some deep breaths. And so I'm just going to talk just a little bit. If you would like to sort of take some of this in, or if questions come up, we can answer the questions. But I wanted to say and show these books as a segue into Ensō. So the Zen circle, or just the circle, doesn't have to be a Zen circle, as part of our brushwork. In the middle of July of this year, 2024, I was in full of sorrow, full of sadness, full of heartbreak, and I decided to start doing a circle a day, an ink circle, Sumi brush ink circle, every day. And I began, and my goodness, this has been a really interesting thing. And I'm sort of have a house now full of ink circles of all sorts, of all kinds. And I think it's an access point for beginners in Sumi, for people who've done Sumi a long time but can't kind of get back into it, or just for relaxation and meditation. After I've done this now since July, I find that whenever I pick up the brush to do them, I immediately relax. And I feel very relaxed afterwards, even though, I may be doing anything. And it's a simple, you only need your brush and your ink, and you don't need to think too much about what you're doing. Though in the demo, we'll sort of talk about a few things that help, but it's just a really, really helpful thing. And in the heart of the brush, which is Lois uses in the Shodo class, at the very beginning, Tanahashi says this on drawing a circle. He says, the circle you draw with a brush reflects your body and mind at that very moment. Unlike ideographs, that is the characters, or kanji, that are loaded with meanings, a circle is open and clean slate, free of meanings. You observe what your hand has just drawn, listen to the unheard voice, and learn much about the deep part of your consciousness. And all this happens just by doing that. In the other book, The Essential Zen, Tanahashi is a co-writer with Tensō David Schneider. Well, the thing is, when you open this book, Tanahashi has Ensōs as illustrations through the whole book. It's amazing. They're all different. I mean, there's no sense of this, if I do a circle, it's got to be perfect in this and this or this way. It's none of that. It's like, whoa, it's just endlessly interesting. And we have a couple more books to show you. This is Thich Nhat Hanh's This Moment is Full of Wonders, the Zen calligraphy of Thich Nhat Hanh. And he oftentimes puts writing in the circles, but it's so, he has a very simple, inviting style. It's just a wonderful book to look at. And then Audrey Yoshiko Sale, her book is a collection of actual circles, Zen circles done by monks or other people who are Zen practitioners. And even them, they're just so, the personality, the original sense of each person just shines through. And it's a wonderful thing. Okay. So we're going to, and we can take questions either now or later. We're going to sort of set the table here. Christelle's going to be using her iPhone to show what I'm going to be trying to show. And as a funny thing, I had materials that I brought and a roll of brushes, but of course I forgot the roll of brushes. So we just went through Christelle's brushes and we just picked out a random few, which I thought, well, this is perfect because we don't have to be prepared. You can pick out an old brush, you can pick out a new brush. Say you want to try out a new brush, or you want to see what the old brush did. Some of the oldest ones are the best ones for this because you can't be perfect. And on the other hand, some of the brushes that are a hard brush that is easy to control, you can make perfect circles. So it's not, but that's not the point, kind of. It's what appears in the moment. Did we miss anything?
No, I
No,
think
okay.
we're good.
Okay, we're good. Okay, Christelle's going to move the computer.
Cheers.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just setting the table. This is what I do in class, and we'll see. We'll try to get this lined up, and this is one of Reed Ozaki's water things. So there's a little water in there. I like to use water containers that don't hold much water. The problem with Sumi ink or trying to do Sumi sometimes is what's called the water control problem, which can be we can work with by using less water, and hopefully I can illustrate some of that. So I have a white plate. I have a little dish here. I'm going to show both the Suzuri, the ink stone, and the ink stick, in case you're not familiar with it. I'm going to randomly pull out of one of Christelle's brushes. And I have paper, all kinds of paper. Paper is the hardest thing to, I think, show on, video. It's easier to kind of show the paper in person, but we'll try to show some of the effects. So tell me, Christelle, does that look like it's lining up pretty well?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay. It's important to have a good rag or a paper towel because of help, especially in the controlling the water part. So I have some paper towels here. And then we're going to take a little bit of water from Reed's water. And I'm going to show the Suzuri first, that for grinding the ink on the stone. I put just a little bit in the center of and I decided to pick the one that has the circle in the square. Seemed appropriate for this subject. And I'm going to use, this is a Chinese ink, and I'm just going to grind in the middle until I have some black ink. Now, the other part of this warm up that turns out that I've discovered in teaching, so we're going to have the circles will be the brush warm up, but another kind of warm up that's really helpful in Sumi is to know what color is on your brush. So I usually have a piece of paper by the side, just a plain piece of paper, which is wherever it is. Yeah, here it is. Just a plain piece of paper. Oh, that's got gold flecks. We'll get another piece of paper. You can be the paper you're going to paint on. That's really helpful to see what the ink is doing on the paper you plan to paint on. This will be whoops, we have many types here. And so once I have enough here, I'm going to, before I dip into the ink with the brush, I'm going to dip it in the water and give it a little, give the water a little, give the brush a little tap on the paper towel. Then put the tip in the ink. Some people recommend just putting the side of the bristles. So look, if you see the tip here, I'm folding it up. Just the tip or the side. So instead of dumping the whole brush into a pool of ink, just put the tip in. And if you have a white plate next to you, if you make some zigzag strokes like this, you can kind of see what's on it. Turned out I ended up dripping some water on it, so I think I'm going to dry it off. So we're now in the moment where anything could happen, and that's okay. We just need to sort of be open to whatever's going to happen. So I'm going to try again and go like this. I'm going to give it a little gray. It seems like that is a nice, lovely gray. I'll just give it a little bit. And if you're, another interesting thing to do that helps sometimes is to grind some of the ink on the edge of the Suzuri, which you know will be your blackest ink because there's no water, not very little water with it. and then pick it up from there. So now it's a little darker. And if I take my paper, let's see if I put the paper here. Some water on that paper. Here we go. And make a side stroke on the paper. This is what's on the brush, just with those few movements. So instead of soaking the brush, so a lot of water's on it. You're very moderate, careful about just dipping it once, giving a little pat on the paper towel, and then picking up the ink from a dry place. And this way, you know, you're going to get some of the tonal qualities of the Sumi ink. Obviously with Sumi, we can paint anything. I mean, we can paint bold black. So this is more like showing a way to, if you're interested in having the tonal variation, how you can tell what's on your brush at the very beginning. So I just dipped this in the tip, and I'm going to make another stroke and see how that is. So the second stroke, some of the black is already gone, or it's more spread through the gray. And so you, by carefully sort of lining up these side strokes, you can tell what you're working with right at the beginning. You know, if you really want to go for it and then pick up, you want to know what the solid ink is like, is in comparison, do the same thing and then make a stroke like that. And you can tell that in that little bit of ink that I just ground on this little Suzuri, what the variation is and what you have to work with. And it will vary in terms of what brush. This is I think this is Northern Wolf. Yeah, this is a wonderful Northern Wolf brush. So it works really well for lots of things and doesn't pull in a whole lot of water. Okay, so that's just a Suzuri and how you can get from ink in this Suzuri to the paper. And then we're going to switch now to a bottled ink. This is Chinese ink. And this is a Japanese ink, which is a kind of a thicker one with a blue tone. So what I'm doing is we're introducing the ink as part of this painting. And this is very thick, kind of almost paste-like, but not quite. So you don't need much of it. I'm just going to try to put a drop about like that. Since we use black on the Northern Wolf, I'm going to randomly or semi-randomly, what was the word? What word were we trying to use? Oh, well, whatever that word was. This is a super white cloud, which has some sheep hair in it. So it's going to pull in more water because the sheep hair is very absorbent with the water. And because I'd like to see, I don't know if the blue tone will show up in the video, but we'll just see. So there again, I'm going to dip the brush in the water, and I'm going to take my paper towel and give it a little pat like this. This brush has been used before, so there's already some on it. We didn't really wash these brushes before, so I could take a little bit more out, or I can pick another brush. We could maybe pick another brush. Let's see what's on, just because it would be nice. So the other wonderful combination brush is Half Moon Flow. This is a Half Moon Flow. It's like the super white cloud, but a slightly larger. So I'm going to put it in clean water. There we go. This is clean water. So one gets particular if you want the blue tones to show up, just for purposes of a demo. In real life, we would go with what we had. Not to worry. So I'm going to pick up just a bit of this blue. It's not a blue, it's a blue black. And I'm going to put it on, do these side strokes on the plate. Ooh, it looks kind of gorgeous just on the plate. and see how much of that went into the paper. So I'm going to pull the paper and make a side stroke. So this shows that I was too cautious with the water. I need a little bit more water. So I'm going to put the tip. I'm not going to dunk the whole brush in. I'm just putting the tip in because the sheep hair in the brush is pulling in the water up the brush. Even as we speak, is happening. So the reason we sometimes get too much water on the brush is because we keep dumping the brush into the water and it just gets too much water, if that makes sense. So instead of going back into the thick ink, I'm going to pick it up on the plate and see what happens. Still pretty dry. So I'm being too cautious because I want to have a nice stroke. I'm going to go like this. There we go. Now we can see the water. So I'm going to put the tip, just the tip, even though I don't want to be in a hurry about this. I just want to kind of do it at its own pace. I very, very early on thought of this as testing the weather, my inside weather and the weather outside. You can't really hurry it. It's just, it is what it is. And what we're doing is finding out what it is. Here's a little more black. There we go. There we have more black on the bottom than light, but a nice variation there. And so this becomes, will become interesting when you do certain strokes. So certain subjects in sumi, like a bamboo leaf or sometimes you can see the variation, but as with this brush, it all kinds of melds into a gray very quickly. Okay, so this is a sort of a warm-up that has to do with ink, which I recommend before painting, even before we start doing the brush work. Okay, so this is the ink part of our friends here. And our brush, we've sort of semi-introduced ourselves to the brush by using them. And so now we have the paper. So I have examples of all kinds of paper. This is half of a sheet of the Chinese calligraphy practice paper. The whole sheet is about this big, this big. Yeah, like this. Some of you will recognize this. If you don't have to have this paper to practice calligraphy and or Ensōs. We'll probably have time to demo it. We do have some.
Yes,
time.
we do.
Yeah, but you can also fold a paper that you want to use into these squares, and it's easy to do. So this is a Japanese Daiso practice paper. So to get the squares out of a paper this size, which is not quite so large. Yeah. I wrote down the dimensions somewhere, but that's okay. So you just fold it into thirds lengthwise. And then halfway on each side, and you end up with 12 squares. And this is great because if you want to experiment with any of your papers, you say, well, I have a new brush. I want to see, well, I have a new ink, whatever. I don't know how it works on this paper. You can fold any paper into these squares. If you like working with the squares, you don't have to, of course. We'll have some, you can cut pieces of paper into square shapes or any way you want. So we're gonna, so I'm going to try the Northern Wolf with, maybe we'll try to use up all the rest of the ink that's in the Suzuri. That's the ink we ground in right here. So let's see how far we can get with this. And this will be Ensō. With this warm-up practice, I think I said, I like, especially with teaching, or with myself, I want to know everything the brush can do in a circle. That means I'm not trying to make a one kind of a circle and repeat it all through all 12 squares. I'm purposely going to make some strokes heavier, some strokes lighter, some strokes slower, some faster, because what I want is the whole range of what the brush and ink can do on this paper. And so let's see what happens. And anything will happen. And oftentimes, so it will be one on a piece of 12 that really speaks to me for whatever reason. So we'll do, and so before I do this, however, I'm going to take a breath in, and then I'm going to breathe out. And as I breathe out, I'm going to start the circle. So this is not a complicated breath meditation or anything like that. It's just something I've noticed in doing these circles, that if I just breathe in, and as I'm breathing out, start the circle, and you'll feel your body center down and just kind of relax. So it's not a thing to worry about. It's more to relax into it and see what happens. It's very interesting. I'm going to dip it in others, and we'll just see. So we're going to try to use up what's in the Suzuri. I, for some reason, start on the lower left, but you can start anywhere. And maybe this, before I forget, I need to say that Barb Trimble told me it was okay to tell you that she was trying to practice she likes to paint orchids, and was painting another orchid, and said she had trouble with the leaf going to the left. And so we talked about, we do Ensōs in class. I said, well, why don't you do an Ensō that starts at the top and goes to the left instead of going to the right, and see if that helps with the leaf. So she said it was okay to say that it helped. So you can change directions. You don't have to go in the same direction, or if there's something you've noticed in your work that you want to work with, you can use this exercise to go in the opposite direction if that direction seems awkward. So it's got practical applications that are very fun. But I'll just do how I kind of do it. So I'm going to take a breath, and then on the out breath, I'm going to start. I have a nice soft ink happening here. I'm letting the tip split. I'm going to do some faster. I'm going to do some with 2 strokes. I'm going to do some tiny ones that kind of go this way. I think I'm going to dip it into the Suzuri again to get a little bit more black on the tip so you can see it. This is very interesting effects you get as the brush kind of, I'm going the opposite direction. I'm going to go. Almost out of ink. There. So all of that happened with one brush load from the Suzuri. If I, ground the ink a little bit longer, although it's amazing how some black came out right here on one of them. Yeah. So it's just amazing, just with that one sort of go through, what the possibilities are on this brush, on this particular day, on this particular paper. It's exciting, really. So we have time to do another one on with the other ink.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
we do.
I think we do. So we'll try something else.
Sally, do we have any questions?
Yeah. Here, maybe they're muted.
Oh, you are muted.
Sorry. Emily just
Yeah.
came in with one first question on the chat. Do you ever do an
Okay.
Ensō, hold on, with your left hand just to see what happens?
Well, we could try it right now. Yeah, I'll try it right now and see. I haven't tried it in this particular practice that I've done since July, but I'm up for it. So I'm gonna pull out some of the blue ink over here because I have quite a bit in this. It's a tiny drop, but it's pretty black. So we can do some that are blacker, just to have that sense. So with the left hand, I'll probably have to put a paperweight down because I'll be very awkward with my left hand. I'm not quite sure how to, so people who are left-handed could tell me if I'm holding this right. Oh, that's interesting. I might try another. This is a Schwen paper that these little squares, in case you want to know. So, you know, since I don't do it that way, I'm kind of slow at the beginning. So the ink was quite intense. And as I got in a hurry about getting around, I kind of lifted up some of the pressure. But you learn a lot by looking at them. You also learn, well, okay, I need to move on, not analyze. Okay, so I'm going to try one more with the left hand and see if I learned anything. There's quite a bit of water on this, but I'll take a little bit off and think. Maybe I'll try. No, I think I feel better going this way. Oh, look what's happening here. Ooh, this is kind of cool because sometimes when you get a little bit more pressure, then some of the lighter tones will show up. And then sometimes you have this interesting edge. And that's the kind of edge that invites painting something in the middle. I like to sometimes, mountains and other things often show up inside my Ensōs just because I like what the ink's doing as it goes in from the outer edge to the inner edge. Yeah, thank you for the challenge to do a left-handed one. That was cool. So we got a couple more times. Oh, this is a little card that I found at Daiso. It's like a blank postcard, but the paper is a little bit thinner. It's got nice sort of curved edges to it. So I'm just sort of experimenting, but so you can do this on any paper. You know, whatever's at hand. So let's see what we can do with this brush on this paper. So here I'm showing sort of different effects on different papers. Take a deep breath in and then breathe out. So this is a sized paper, so it came, so the water and the ink, you can see some of the tones, but it's very smooth going around. And you can notice like I have a lot of Ensōs these days where the ends don't want to stay with the circle, they're pointing out to something else. And sometimes you can see gestures happening, and that's really interesting. It'll all be individual to you. Whatever's happening, it's you. Yeah, so you don't have to.
Do you ever use a shikishi board or a pre-mounted paper? A pre-mounted Schwen?
I don't usually do that, but I've just discovered that the Lakewood Daiso is now selling a shikishi board for not much money. So I brought one home, but I haven't tried it yet. So we'll see. But it can be anything. I mean, it can be watercolor paper. They're very lovely on watercolor paper. And somewhere here we have an example of some of these. Oh, like this is a watercolor paper, Strathmore. Yeah, so you can do it on anything. And it's certainly if you're skilled and you're okay doing it on the pre-mounted, that would be great. Yeah.
Do you want to try it on the shiki board?
No. I want to show some other things first. I did. So how much time? We have just maybe a couple more minutes. Yeah. What did I want to do? Okay. So trying different papers. What we were looking at is a Shrin. This is an unknown paper. It's kind of, it's got some strength to it. So I think it's like a P mauve type of paper, which means it'll be semi-sized. So you can use more water if you like. And, oh, okay. I sometimes go back because I want to bring that pointy part there. I want to bring some of the black back. And then I get, oh, I think I want to make a mountain or something. And then my favorite is some grass or something growing in it. Because it's semi-sized, the water is pulling in the black in different places. But just as an example of how you can go inside the circle and do things. And then one more example of hopefully one that's going to show a shape, a white shape in the middle, so that your emphasis is less on the circle part, but on the shape of the light inside. I don't know if I could do this, but that gets very interesting as you practice this kind of practice. So are there any questions while we wrap up?
No more questions in the chat.
What's the name of the place you buy the shikishi boards?
Well, what I'm talking about is Daiso. Try. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we'll use up the rest of the ink and see what happens. Anyway, this practice part is, or the Ensō practice part is something I encourage you to do and experience. It's wonderful. These papers. This is a paper called shoji, which is actually it's a Japanese paper, kind of got some heft to it, but not a whole lot. That's actually used for repairing screens, paper screens in Japan. And Hiromi, Japanese paper company in California, sells it for calligraphy. It's absorbent, but can really handle like a stroke going around like this. And sometimes the ink will kind of creep in and you'll see an interesting shape in the white part, just depending, as we sort of wait and watch and see what happens. Okay, well, I hope you have fun doing some Ensōs and moving along in Sumi art. Okay, so no more questions?
Yeah. So does anybody have a question?
Well, I have a
Dave,
question.
David
I put it in the chat, but I can ask.
Yeah,
Well,
go ahead, David.
okay. I was wondering how you keep your papers organized. I mean, I've got many different kinds of papers, especially after I've cut it. Like I might have 10 in a roll. Sure, that's labeled, but
Right.
it starts getting dispersed, or I cut it into smaller pieces and then I put it in a pile and I think for sure I'm going to remember it. And then I don't.
I know.
I use
I know.
folders.
That's how you do an Ensō practice and see what happens on which paper. Yeah, it's really interesting that way.
David,
so I'm not very.
I use folders.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I use
you-
folders for everything.
Daiso has these clear folders that look like, well, you probably can't see it, well, you can see it. And so you could, if you want to be organized, cut them in this shape. That would be, and that's what I was trying to do here, but I'm an unorganized person. So then I was fiddling with the folders. but there are, yeah, you could, and so these are semi-transparent, so you can sort of see what's in it. And they're not expensive.
And you can buy folders that have pockets, and that kind is really helpful.
Yeah, it is true. Definitely true.
You know what? They have
Yeah.
wonderful folders at Daiso too. You can get color-coded
Yeah,
folders and
right.
plastic folders, all kinds. They're
Okay.
I've
just
been using
wonderful.
those for
Yeah.
years.
They're out there. Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to get in and pick up the brush and do this.
Thank you.
Selinda, we have one more
fun.
question.
Okay.
From Jude Palin, when creating a picture in the middle of the Ensō, does it have to be a continuous stroke?
Oh, no. No, we're sort of in what the creative imagination is talking to you about at that point. You know what I mean? Just something occurs and you keep going.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay,
There's
super.
no, you know, what I'm showing you is it's not a rule. There's no rules involved really. I mean, practice really helps because you can figure out different ways to angle your wrist and brush to get around the circle. And if you watch, you know, like master Chinese painter, when they paint, they have a lot of flexibility in their wrists and can do, you know, all kinds of stuff. So it's really a physical practice and trying out new things and all of that. And the circle is just a way to get into that. And magic really happens. And a magic is always different for every individual. And that's what I really like about it. I really love it in class because it's, you know, people are painting and they're happy, they're enjoying it, and it's great.
Well, we have a lot of thank yous and wonderful Selinda
yes.
notes in the chat. Everybody really enjoyed
Okay.
it, Selinda.
Good. Well, thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
See you
Thank
soon.
you,
I hope we see you
Selinda.
in
Thank you.
person.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay.
again.
Are you going to save the chat, Selinda?
What?
Are you going to save
I'm just standing here. Oh, I can stay.
No, I will save the chat for
Save
sure.
the chat. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
save the chat for her so she can read it.
Oh,
for
okay. Okay. All
For
right.
sure.
Well, this has been an experience. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Selinda. This
Thank
has
you,
been
Selinda.
wonderful.
Okay. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Uh-huh.